Good afternoon, everyone. Welcome to the next episode of Business Sustainability Talks. My name is Namrata, and I'm the co-founder of ShiftEco along with Sukriti. And we continuously run this series, Business Sustainability Talks, because we want to invite senior sustainability professionals such as Fazil. And we aim to look at different industries, see what's happening in different industries, in different companies, in the realm of sustainability. And the aim of this series is to create this open platform of knowledge sharing so that we're all learning with each other. So thank you so much for logging in. Before we proceed, I'd love for you to introduce yourself, Fazil. I don't think I'll do justice. So if you could give a quick introduction to yourself and your role.
Thanks, Namrata. I'm to the ShiftEco team. Fazil Abdul. I sit at TAQA. So TAQA is a brand name for Abu Dhabi National Energy Company. I sit in the HQ strategy function. I'm the vice president for sustainability and climate change. 16 years in the industry, mix and match of energy industry and management consulting.
Right. I know you've done a lot of interesting work in the past. Will you tell us a little bit about that before we deep dive into TAQA as well?
Yeah, so I started my career as an engineering graduate. So I did my engineering in electrical electronics. Although first couple of years, my job was in IT industry. So I'm originally from India, although I was brought up in Abu Dhabi. After 2 years in the IT industry, I moved into the energy sector, mostly in engineering roles. So I did my master's at Masdar Institute. Masdar did have an institute back then, collaboration with MIT in USA. And that was specialized in sustainability, and that's when I kind of moved into that field. And I would say that's the time when sustainability itself had some career options to move into. Otherwise, it was not easy to find some sustainable roles unless you did some projects part-time in your job. But yeah, ever since I did my master's, and I was initially with the Dubai Supreme Council of Energy 12 years back. That was a time when Dubai was into the green economy, the integrated energy space. So I was helping mostly Dubai government, some of the national governments here in the GCC, some of Dubai government entities to set their emission reduction strategies, inventories, green economic strategies, and so forth. 4 years with them, I moved to consulting, was mostly with EY, briefly with PwC, specifically on climate change and strategy, and last 2 years with TAQA.
So the reason I asked you for that is I really enjoyed hearing your journey the last time we spoke. So I thought it would benefit even all the viewers to understand your rich experience and what all you've done. I think energy is a really interesting space. It's the fundamental concept behind everything. Sources say that the world demand for energy is expected to increase by 50% by 2050. So it's a very crucial sector that you work in. So to start the discussion, if you could tell us a little bit about sustainability in the energy sector, and if you could introduce the concept, because sometimes people view that as contradictory.
No, I think the best correlation is, end of the day, sustainability is all about how well you manage your resources so that you're not affecting, compromising the needs of the future life. And when we talk about resources, a large part of that resources is all connected to the energy. So if you look at your daily lives, whether it is electricity, whether the fuel you're being running on, or even any of the products which you see around, right? In the value chain, we see energy is a key contributor. And it's a key indicator of how the economy is progressing. So that's where it's very essential how you're managing your energy becomes a key part of sustainability. And that's where the primary topics of sustainability, which is climate change, is all connected to energy. Roughly, let's say 80 to 85% of global emissions are from energy. And connecting with what you said, it's only expected to increase in terms of absolute energy use, right? So that's why it is very fundamental when you talk about sustainability and efficient use of resources, energy plays a big part. Because not only the impact it has on the climate change, but impact it has on the economy, the people's life. So it's very fundamental in terms of the way it operates.
Right. So what is, can you give us an introduction to TAQA's journey and its role in sustainability in the energy sector?
Sure. See, TAQA has been from 2005 onwards until 2020. It was predominantly based outside the UAE, mostly investing in energy generation and oil and gas business. But in 2020, there was a major reverse merger with an entity known as AD Power. Whatever you had in the utility value chain of Dhabi and whatever TAQA had outside came under one umbrella. So we have three main verticals. One is the generation, which is not just power generation, but power and water generation. Historically, it has been more dominated by the fossil fuel-based generation, natural gas.
Yeah.
The 10 plus independent power and water producing plants here in Abu Dhabi, we have a 60% stake in it. And they also produce water through desalination. End of 2022, we became a leading shareholder for Masdar. That's where our renewable energy projects have been happening.
Right.
The second vertical we have is transmission distribution. And there are 4 entities underneath that. You have the networks business, which is transport. You have 2 distribution companies, Abu Dhabi Distribution and Align Distribution. Last but not least is Abu Dhabi Energy Services. And a third business which we have is existing oil and gas businesses, which we have in 4 countries. One of them we are exiting as we speak, but it's more of a declining business.
Right.
There are decommissioning happening, especially for oil in UK.
Right.
One more business which is coming into the mix is called SW Salting Wastewater.
Okay.
As we speak, we are in the final stages of regulatory approvals.
Right.
But completing your question, like what is sustainability for us?
Yeah.
So after the reverse merger, we had a detailed corporate strategy, and ESG is at the heart of the corporate strategy.
Right.
So right from the vision, the key targets which we set have all been centered on sustainability.
Yeah.
The main reason being TAQA has a huge footprint anyways, greenhouse gas inventory and of course the net zero ambitions. Yeah. But even more importantly, I would say we depend a lot on the bond market. So the banks and investors globally, the fixed income investors have been pressing a lot on ESG.
Right.
They do understand the value of impact investing, and more and more access to capital and cost to capital is getting affected by ESG.
Right.
So on that basis, we then developed an ESG strategy full-fledged.
Okay.
Not going in depth of it, but some of our key main targets is on climate change. We are one of the only energy majors in the region to commit an absolute reduction target.
Right.
Because usually the energy companies here, they find it tough to set an absolute reduction. They set a reduction based on energy density, based on, let's say, GDP or production, but we are committed an absolute reduction.
Right.
We have similarly set targets on reverse osmosis, just could effectively 60 to 80% reduce energy use while you're producing or desalinating water.
Okay.
There are targets on 25% reduction on the water distribution losses.
Yep.
Similarly, also on safety, diversity, we are targeting 30% women in top management by 2030. So the ESG strategy is much more zoomed in of the corporate strategy, where we looked at the key pillars and where we set some ambitions.
Right.
And it plays a big part in our corporate scorecard and funding as well.
Right.
75 billion is investment in the public domain we have announced. 80% of it is towards energy transition activities by 2030.
I really like the word transition. I was looking at the TAQA reports, and everything seems to talk about transition and it's transitioning, and there's so many plans that are underway. What do you think are the opportunities and the challenges in this transition? Because it's a really, it's fundamentally changing the business. So what, according to you, what those?
See, globally and even regionally here, utilities have a lot of opportunities from a business point of view.
Yeah.
If you really look at the emission space, right, everything is getting electrified. So apart from utilities, the oil and gas, the cement industry, the aluminum, the steel, transport industry, which are running by fossil fuels, all are getting electrified. EVs or everyone connecting to the grid. So which means more and more we invest. That's something key for our transmission business as well. And critical for UAE's net zero ambitions as well.
Yeah.
As a plan to connect as much as possible everything to the grid, and then make sure the grid is powered by more and more clean, which is nuclear and renewable energy source, right? So from that point of view, we're getting a lot of customers connected to the grid. So it's an opportunity always from a business point of view.
Right.
I think challenges, just like any other heavy industry, this all requires a lot of investment. Whether it is from TAQA or whether it is from the respective governments which we operate, it comes with a lot of investments, upfront investments, and not necessarily you get immediate returns. There are some markets where, for example, when you're investing in renewable energy, you get better returns.
Yeah.
But there are some markets where investing in fossil fuel still might be the easier option, right? So in such instances, you have to make a conscious effort where not necessarily give you economic benefits altogether immediately. So that's a challenge which we have to navigate for the greater cost.
And that's a big challenge, and that's what a lot of people talk about. In fact, some of our earlier business sustainability talks spoke about that. A lot of investors, a lot of banks look for quick wins, which come with fossil fuels. Whereas clean energy is more long-term gain and not everyone connects with it as much. I know you're saying investor, mindsets are changing, but how can that be addressed in a better manner? Or is it regulation? What, according to you, could help the situation?
Since it's human nature, end of the day, we don't want instant returns or profit, right? Whether we as an individual investor, you want something returns very quickly as possible. See, in terms of drivers, it's a combination of several factors. I think regulations plays a big part. I think whenever regulations are there, people know, okay, that's the norm and you have to go within that. But I think beyond regulations, there needs to be a behavioral change across the value chain. Let's say from the consumers, from what in suppliers or who are building it, developers, I think that is very critical. I think third is, for me, that's the most important thing. You have to integrate sustainability in your business.
Yeah.
I mean, often people think sustainability is more for risk, right? And they see it as a negative. But if you really look into it, you have to think it as a value creation. And when you play that value creation, of course, there will be some short-term opportunities, medium-term opportunities, and long-term, of course, that's where you have to take a call.
Yeah. But
the more and more integrate sustainability and think it as a value creation, I think that's the best solution which we can have. But yeah, when you can't keep away regulations, more the regulations, the better.
Yeah. I really like the point of behavioral change, and that's something I'm individually quite passionate about. And I totally agree with you that people need to connect with sustainability. So coming back to TAQA, how I know you all have sustainability ambitions, you all have chalked out a whole ESG plan, but how is that trickling down to the employees of the company?
What helps us really is actually the governance aspect. I think the way what TAQA has done really well, which I think is the best practice, is how sustainability is integrated into business. I think first and foremost, we have, right from the top leadership, there's a serious buy-in. So we have a dedicated board-level sustainability committee, which meets on a regular basis, looks at how the strategy is happening. Second is we have the management committee, which is the whole of executive management chaired by the CEO. We have more and more close interaction with the respective executive management owners on various initiatives. And then we have the corporate sustainability team, sits within the strategy, which also helps because depending on the success and failures of those initiatives, we can accordingly tailor the corporate strategy.
Right.
And then you have, you call it ESG champions or sustainable leaders appointed at each of the business units and the companies, right?
Then
so that really sets the tone because there is a buy-in and a visibility on the initiatives just integrated in the strategy.
Yeah.
I think one thing which TAQA does well is, I mean, usually I have seen at a lot of companies, you have a strategy sitting separate, but not necessarily is budgeted into the financial plan, right? But we don't commit something unless it is integrated in the financial planning.
Right.
I mean, one of the key stakeholders which is involved is actually a finance function led by CFO. So that always helps. And more importantly, it's integrated in the scorecards. The group scorecard, I think roughly over 40% of the KPIs are all related to sustainability, which then cascades down to the CEO, the CFO, the strategy officer, the executive management, employees. So that kind of sets the direction. Each and every employee is involved knows what exactly is sustainability in their working sphere. So which really helps.
No, I think that's very important because we often find with many companies where at a strategic level, you have a lot of sustainability ambitions. And then the question always arises is, how is it trickling down to the culture of the company? How is it trickling down to employees, their scorecards, what they are expected to do? And I think that connection becomes really important. So coming back to TAQA, it seems like there have been different milestones in TAQA's journey. If you can walk us through some of the key milestones TAQA has achieved in its journey so far.
So the key ones have been emission reduction. That's where our major target has been. So we committed a 25% absolute reduction in our because the global entities reduction by 2030 compared to 2090. As we speak, we already reached 19% compared to 2090. And again, it's an absolute reduction. So what was in terms of numbers, the ones who likes numbers, 60 million tons of scope 1 and 2 emissions in 2019.
So how did you go about getting that reduction? Because an actual reduction is hard. So I mean, it would be interesting for everyone watching to understand.
See, the key driver is the support we get from Abu Dhabi government. So the way the Abu Dhabi grid is evolving is we own most of the gas assets, but then there's more and more nuclear and solar coming into the grid, right? So when the nuclear and solar comes to the grid, we are reducing the usage of our gas plants. So I think in simple terms, 2019, close to 100% of electricity production was actually driven by natural gas in the grid. End of 2023, we have 33% energy coming from nuclear, nuclear zero emissions, and another 6%, not capacity, the actual production coming from solar.
Okay.
So that difference is actually leading into that 11 million tons of CO2 production which we have, which is not critical just for Abu Dhabi, but also UAE's performance and numbers which they committed.
Yeah.
But apart from that, I think key to mention this part of the world is, as you know, historically and even still majority, we produce electricity and water here like in a combined cycle. In simple terms, the waste from the electricity production is used to drive the water production. And it's a coupled production which has its own challenges in a country like UAE. Because we have electricity demand, let's say 4 times in the summer compared to winter, whereas water doesn't change. So you don't have the flexibility to operate the electricity and water production like in a more efficient manner, right? But there is a technology known as reverse osmosis. So that's coming more and more. We have a target of 2/3 of total water desalination to be driven by reverse osmosis. That is happening well in place. As we speak, the largest reverse osmosis plant, one of the largest, is actually in Tawila, 200 MIGD. So that is also helping to energy efficiency aspect. I should also say our oil and gas entities are doing a great job in reducing energy density of the upstream gas production. There are some notable energy efficiency projects which have been registered in carbon markets across in Canada, in UK, and so forth. Last but not least, a lot of investments are going into Masdar.
Okay.
I think the key point is Masdar's impact is not just here in the UAE. Of course, there are notable projects in the UAE for them along with TAQA, but it's operating in 20+ countries. So what was supposed to be driven by fossil fuel plants actually is driven by solar because of Masdar. Last year we raised a 1 billion green bond, which was mostly going towards Masdar. So that has been a major positive, and the trend on that direction is only expected to continue. So yeah, in a nutshell, Abu Dhabi's transition plan, energy efficiency measures, as I spoke, investment going towards renewables, and that is helping towards that. But one angle which I would like to emphasize, especially for a company like us in the networks, there are a lot of emission sources we are connecting to the grid. And there are a lot of such investments, exciting investments happening even globally. For example, last year TAQA announced was stake in Xlinks. It's a company in UK. The eventual idea is you have close to 15 gigawatt of renewables in Morocco, connected using the largest HVDC cable to UK. Now, the role of grids can never be underplayed, because people, when you talk about emissions, always talks about generation. But a lot of renewable energy projects in the globe are stuck just because you don't have the grids, right? And when you're connecting the grids, emissions might be counted or less, but the amount of emissions through connecting through renewables and nuclear to the customers, I think the impact in reducing others' emissions is significant. I think that's one angle which TAQA is doing a really great job, and a lot of our 2030 strategy focuses in electrifying and decarbonizing via the.
Well, that's a very important one. I think about a conversation about EVs on this part of the world is also is the grid really clean, and I think that will really help that transition even at an end consumer level.
So I mean, in Abu Dhabi, you can safely say if someone was using an EV in 2019, and now there's close to 40% of their intensity is being powered by clean electricity. You rightly said, I mean, just having an EV doesn't make sense if the grid is powered by fossil fuels, then it doesn't really help.
Exactly, and consumers don't understand that. They have an EV because it's trendy and nice to have an EV. No, I completely understand that. So now if we go into a little bit about, you've talking about UAE's net zero strategy and how TAQA combines in it. So how is it aligned? How are you working with other stakeholders to meet UAE's strategy? Because going net zero by 2050 is a very ambitious goal, and it needs a lot of different players to come together, because it can't happen by one player.
I mean, see, in Abu Dhabi, TAQA, the way the utility system is kept is, we have Abu Dhabi Department of Energy as a policy maker who has a target of 60% clean energy by 2035. Then we have the system planner, Emirates Water Electricity Company, known as EVEC, who tells which power plant to operate at what point of time. Basically, the brain of the system. But what happens in such projects, let's say when we had, it's always an ongoing project led by Minister of Climate Change and of course Minister of Energy. So there are wider stakeholder consultation, multiple stakeholder consultations where based on the greenhouse gas inventory and the owners of each and every sector, let's say energy, oil and gas, manufacturing, and even manufacturing, there are so many subsectors like aluminum, cement, waste sector, transport sector. There are clear owners, enablers, and all defined, and they come into the play. There are some, let's say, top to bottom kind of ambitions given, but then you also have to ideally work it bottom to top. It may not be always the perfect process, but I think the stakeholder engagement aspect in UAE is something stand out in terms of how it has evolved over the years, something which neighbors or any leading countries can take a note of. It's an evolving process and it's an improving process, and that's one of the reasons why the targets are always getting updated here in the UAE. Of course, there are always room to improve further, which I'm sure with UAE it's going to happen. But yeah, stakeholder consultation is key, because at the end of the day, you're committing as a big number externally to the globe. You have to have the stakeholder buy-in, especially when you're communicating some 20, 30 numbers which are not far away as we speak.
Exactly, and I think a lot of people are skeptical because 2030 is right around the corner, and the ambitions are really large. So I think the question really is, what are the challenges of meeting 2030 numbers, and what is the mitigation effort to, meet those numbers?
I think our finance team was joking, like, before 2030 was something very far away. So now to make the 5-year business plan, you already have 2030 at the end of it, right?
Yes.
Oh, I think the challenge is it's very dynamic if you see the global macroscope, right? When TAQA is getting into more and more markets, each market is different. So to have a predictable market is not very easy. So it's simply said, what you actually forecast is not easy to get going more and more. There's a lot of geopolitics comes into play, the economic situation comes into play. Pandemics, yeah. And I think this year is even critical. I think more than 50% of world's GDP or population of both are going into the elections this year. So how things might go. There are a lot of sentiments being played. So I think, planning is very tough. I think diversification is very important.
Yeah.
But while you diversify, make sure you keep that high level ambitions are not affected. I think that is important. Yeah, and I think always good to think a bit over a long term, not just thinking short term. I think that is very important when it comes to time. It's in anyone's game.
So you bring up a very interesting point, and it's nice to hear that there's a lot of unpredictability of what future wants because of different issues. So when you're planning or committing to, say, targets, are there scenarios like plan A? If plan A doesn't work, it's going to be plan B. Is that
definitely? I think everyone has to work on the different scenarios. Even when they set the targets, I think I'm sure they go scenario analysis and come into the play. One thing is for sure, like whatever is changing, one thing we know, like the world's impact from a climate change point of view is only getting worse.
Yes.
I think.
It's amazing how people can connect with it. They're dealing with heat waves, and you're dealing with all sorts of things. So it's personal to people.
Yeah,
not people feel it.
Yeah, a few years back they thought, it's something earthquake happening, let's say flooding happening elsewhere, hurricane happening elsewhere. Now people, I think in any part of the world can actually clean see, right?
Yeah.
We even we went through. We have been going through it after the temperature rise.
Or the floods in April.
Yeah, I think a lot of focus is now coming not just on climate mitigation or reducing emissions, but adaptation. They know for it as a given, it's going to be there. How I want to adapt to that.
Yeah.
What infrastructure you're going to make. For example, like sea level water rise is something which will affect a lot of our infrastructure, which is mostly in the coastal belt.
Yeah.
Our transformers, the way it has erected has to be changed. Even existing transformer has to be changed. Infrastructure has to be built differently. A lot of cost has to be put into it. So I think that is kind of a reality. It's getting more and more there.
Yeah.
And that is something which people cannot ignore into the planning, right? So that's some sort of a given which they have to take into account when it comes to that.
Yeah. No, I think I was going to start deviating to adaptation talk, but maybe we need to come back to corporate sustainability because that's the focus of the session. So you see in the energy sector and in industries, how do you see sustainability being adopted by corporates? Because, you have this classic case where everyone's blaming one another. Everyone's blaming the government. Or there's not enough regulation. The government is saying, oh, it's the companies. The companies are saying it's not us, it's the consumers. They're demanding, so in that case, if I want to zoom into the corporate lens and say, how do corporations hold themselves accountable, and how do they make a business case for sustainability? You've been in this space quite long. If you could help anyone watching on how they can make that business case.
I think first and foremost, as I told before, is see sustainability as a value creation. And the issue is everyone thinks, okay, there's something negative, it is going to affect you. Of course, there are some aspects where you have to spend something in the short term and may not get enough returns. But see, in our case, we first had to sit on the drawing board and identify what are the opportunities for us. So as I said, we clearly know electrification is something which will help us. And more electrification, which we go through renewables and nuclear. It's a big investments at the start, but we know in the longer runs, we are getting more returns, right? I mean, this is for us. For each sector, it might be different. For banking sector, it's a different ball game.
Yeah.
Retail sector, it's a different ball game. I think you have to kind of aim a North Star. So it could be maybe based on, let's say, 1.5 degrees Celsius, what is the carbon budget left? And keep an eye on it. And then you see what you can do as a bare minimum without affecting your balance sheet, for example.
Yeah.
And then the stakeholder engagement comes into play, because once you do that clear analysis, you can actually show to the stakeholders like what is it for them. I think that is important. Let's say when you're going to the governments, I think the narrative has to go in a way, like you have to put some budget. No, that should not be the case. Yeah, you have to put some of the budget, but what is it in for you? What is it in for me? What is it in for the supply chain? I think that narrative is very important. I think, and that for that narrative, it's not easy to go. You have to do a clear analysis.
Yeah.
So I think that is critical, changing the conversation to more of a value creation and clearly telling what is it in for each stakeholder.
Yeah.
I think you have to be very transparent, because of course there are pros and cons.
Yeah.
So something when we did our net zero strategy in 2022 announced, we did have consultation with the ministries, the regulators, off-takers in various countries where we operate. I mean, we don't think, we, as I told, like, we always brag, okay, like 25% reduction, which we claim as a target is, the only energy players in the region to commit. So, but we still know we have to improve that, right? Let's say if we go for a net zero scenario, for a science-based target, we have to go even higher. That is also important. Like, after you set the target, you also have to see how can I improve further, start the discussions, for off-take point of view, regulatory point of view. So you have to be always doing that conversations. And I think it's easy to say for me, right? Even when we went through the process, it's not very hard to implement, because often it's very obvious. Like, when we both are talking, when we get into a negotiation, how challenging is it?
And it's not the money.
More people come into play, so it gets interesting. What I say is value add for you, not necessarily I agree. Yeah, I think more and more analysis and more talks which you have to do. I think end of the day, there needs to be drive from yourself as a stakeholder. You should not just put an economic angle to it. I think that's one of the way the world goes. You value everything from a dollar perspective, but you have to put costs on, let's say, carbon or the social thing, and kind of see if you're not putting that cost, how much you have to pay for that in the future in terms of some catastrophic events or reputations and so on.
No, I think that's really well put. I think numbers really help the case.
Yeah.
And a value, and looking at the business from a scenario of the other party, which also helps building a stronger business case for it to be adopted.
I think the best example is in the corporate, when we talk about, it's easy to talk about 1 and 2 scopes, but scope 3 is a value chain, other 15 categories. I think that's where it gets even more tricky.
Yeah.
You have the suppliers, you have your investments, you have your logistics, you have your product side. I think especially for scope 3, this becomes even more critical.
Yep.
So scope 3 is a territory where you can't assign a one single owner. It's a collective effort, right? So for your scope 3 to improve, you have to jointly go together with your value chain partners, but you have to invest, they have to invest, and see which way you invest, bring in joint benefits, and then go in that direction.
So you've been in the UAE for many years, Fazil. I think, keeping your own. How have you seen the sentiment and business landscape change? I know it's a little off track, but I was just thinking about it. I mean, I've been in the UAE 10 years and I've seen it change. So I wonder how you've seen the whole landscape change in specific regards to sustainability.
I think all of it has been good. And I'll say from my personal experience, like, this thing when I did my master's, right, after 5 years of work, and this was some 12, 13 years back, when I told sustainability, at least people now understand what is sustainability.
Yeah.
Before, when I say sustainability, even still some sections of my friends, oh, he's like the weather guy. I think like I would have seen such uplifting through in terms of understanding the impact to sustainability and how they integrate into it, which is still to be given. But I think, yeah, UA for me is always in the right direction from, the change point of view. I think it's not very common you see ministers and ministries having sustainability specific roles and departments and coordination committees and everything. Not something which is very common elsewhere. So I think kudos to the leadership. I think that creates a big change in terms of how it is being perceived by the people.
Well, I'm straight. Now, I want to ask you a difficult question. Imagine we're in 2030.
Okay.
How do you see the landscape in 2030?
See, I think climate change impacts, I feel it's only getting to, if you see, just compare months or years, right, the change is like exponential.
Yeah.
But for some reason or other, people are trying to get used with it, right? Rather than, they're doing, okay, how can I do something for that? I think the impacts will be even more pronounced, whether it is on the economy, whether it is on the food security. I think even people's lifestyles will get affected because of sustainability. You never know. Some regions which you might think are very safe may completely turn around and be unsafe. And we already see that.
Yeah.
From a real estate point of view, there are some parts of the land where you think, oh, like that's the best buy, then all of a sudden things changed. So I think the impacts of sustainability, or climate change in particular, I think that is getting more pronounced. Two, what I think is there'll be more and more regulations. Whether or not the regulations might be still effective or not is a question remain to be outseen. Because end of the day, for me, the real biggest sustainability problem the world faces is make people think climate change and everything. From a resource point of view, there's still a lot of disparity. If you just take world as a classroom, let's say class of 10, there are 2 or 3 students who get a lot of benefits. There are some students who doesn't have a light or something like that, right? And then there are a big chunk of people who are in that zone. They have to grow and they feel like everything is being constrained. So that dilemma, I think, is going to get intensified, which is going to reflect on the economic positions of let's say, various regions, right?
So people also say the wealth disparity, actually the wealthy emit much more than ones which the poor have to bear the consequences of their
exactly
actions.
So that disparity is, for me, one of the most important sustainability problem for me. That gets reflected everywhere. You talk about energy security, it's getting reflected everywhere. And that will only get more and more because of what I mentioned. I feel regulations will pick up, especially on sustainability. Whatever the awareness is coming, still it's a very weak terminology when it comes to standards, when it comes to reporting, when it comes to impact assessment. I feel regulations will pick up, especially regulations connected to integrating sustainability with financials.
Yeah.
So it's which means I think all in all it means there's a lot of work to do, right? That in the next 5 years.
And I think a lot of people tend to be very skeptical about this whole space because they feel, everyone's going to say, but nothing's going to happen. everyone wants tangible action.
Yeah.
And I think for me, I'm interested to see what 2034 is even in terms of the commitments made, in that aim. Because I think one thing that you said absolutely correctly is that everything is unpredictable. When the SDGs were set in 2015, we're now sitting at 24, and we've actually regressed on some SDGs, right? So, and the idea is when you sat there in 2015 making the SDGs, you had no foresight into what's coming ahead, and yet things had a dynamic way of playing out. And I think that's where my skepticism comes in, and I guess that's where for a lot of people watching as well.
To be fair, we cannot blame the skeptics, right? I think they have a point because we talked about a lot happening, right?
Yeah.
But whether are they enough? If you ask that question, we all know it is not enough, right?
Yeah.
So they have a point when they're being skeptical, and there needs to be more and more being done.
Yeah.
There have been a lot of changes, but I still feel things have been very slow. I mean, if you see the history of the COPs happening, there's a lot of positives in the COP28. A lot of things getting into action in terms of, not just in terms of commitments, but in terms of real actions. But I think we have to just accelerate that. Whether we are accelerating, still not enough.
Yeah. No, because we're playing catch up for nothing, right? So that's
things like have a mentality, or okay, let's pick it up to 2030. We might have some amazing technology which is going to be very cheap and will reduce emissions. I think that mentality should also change. Of course, you will have some technology support for that, but you have to be a bit more proactive rather than reactive.
That's good. So I want to come into a different part of the session. I want to look there. There are a lot of participants, a lot of people watching who are from different industries. So some are just starting out in their sustainability journey. So how do you think business can get started with implementing? This is industry agnostic.
Yeah.
So imagine a company who's done nothing in sustainability now wants to get started. What would be the tips, and how would you recommend what they should do to get started?
I think first and foremost, I mean, in our sustainability professional language, we use the term materiality. I think the first and foremost is, because when you talk sustainability, there are a lot of topics.
Yes.
If you look at the reporting standards.
And that's the point, Fazil, sometimes there's so many topics, and I think it's also an overwhelming and confusing space for people.
Yeah.
And everyone wants to do everything, but they don't.
No, I mean, it's not practical, right? To keep it simple, you have the universe of topics, but pick the topics that rank them, which you think is important for you and your stakeholders. Only thing is that you need to have a balance when you rank what is important for you and stakeholders. Make sure stakeholders are clearly taken into account. That's where the challenge normally happens. Once you rank them, then you prioritize, and then you have to, again, it should be less than some 10 topics where you think are the key of your ESG strategy, or maybe ideally less than 5, right? In our case, we had 25 material topics. We picked on 6. The idea being is that it's not you are discarding all of the topics, right? But idea, these are the 6 topics which is the most important for you and your stakeholders. There will be topics where you are really good at, but the important thing is you also have to pick the topics where you think you're very weak.
Yeah.
I mean, I have to admit, when TAQA did an exercise, 2 of the topics, which is community, CSR, and diversity, we know that we are not grading the topic. So we had to bring that topics to the core because stakeholders were looking into it. And we know, if we do well on the topic, it will automatically help our value chain on the bottom line.
Right.
So I think that's prioritization at the start is very important. Then it goes back to the same repetition which I've been telling. Understand what exactly is sustainable for your business through those topics.
Yeah.
How exactly those topics are helping to create your value, even financially. And also, what is the risks? I think that is the most important topic, and usually many doesn't do that.
Yeah.
Don't always think sustainability is something which sits in the side and not integrated in the corporate strategy. Then you're doing a big mistake.
Right.
Because then you have a separate document as a fashion statement, and then it may not go anywhere, right? So that process, once you have that core topics and understanding what is it in for you in terms of value, what are the risks, how do you see gradually evolving in line of the market? Easy said, but it needs a lot of analysis. But I think if you own your business, what scale of it, what industry is it, I think you should be in a position to judge that. And then key part after that is stakeholder engagement. Make sure all the key stakeholders talk to them and vet your strategy. I think those are the first steps and most critical steps in my view, which they have to take.
Right. And I think one important aspect of it is, and you brought it up a little bit before, it has to be measurable.
Yeah.
Everything you're doing, whether it's the amount of budget required or how long you take to actually see some value. So how could they make these targets that they set, or these goals they choose to work on, make them achievable and measurable?
Yeah.
Because,
that's one of the toughest things in sustainability. How do you actually quantify the impact of sustainability?
Yeah.
And even if you go to the leading consultants, they all have their own frameworks. It's very subjective. I mean, let us put it that way. But still, like, even if it is subjective, you have to define a framework. What is it for you?
Right.
Let's say even if you're doing a impact project, community impact project.
Yeah.
Maybe you have to assess what are the outcomes, what are the beneficiaries, what are they getting. So the question is, irrespective of the subjectivity of that measurement, you still have to establish a framework and put KPIs around it. Some of the topics might be easy to measure. Let's say for carbon, I think it's much more relatively easy to measure. We can put a price based on the carbon pricing, but CSR might be different. Safety might be different. I think that's the universal challenge of any sustainable professional. But the key is get started. Put a framework. Your framework may not be 100% right. No one's framework is 100% right when it comes to impact assessment. And you don't have to wait for the regulatory bodies or anything to define a framework. Of course, they will do that in parallel by the consideration by come, but you establish your framework, pair it through the key stakeholders and start measuring on it. At least you know what was before based on that framework and what is now and where you're heading. I think that's really important.
I really like that advice. I find that when people are looking at the sustainability space, they look at perfection or like everything to be seamless. And I think it's important for all of us to acknowledge it's a work in progress. Achieving a net zero target, it's a work in progress. It's not something that happens in
quite naturally. You do financial accounting and you're doing economic valuation with this much more defined and subjective, and that's what problem of the sustainability world.
Yeah.
There are a lot of standardization happening, but you start with something, right? I mean, not be perfect, but gradually you refine it.
Yeah. So I know there are a lot of reporting mechanisms for all those who are looking at tracking their progress, measuring it. What would you recommend? Are there any recommendations for you? Because once they've started on, they've created these goals. They're now making them achievable, measurable through some metrics that make sense to the business at the time. But how can they keep that momentum going? What methods can they use to kind of track this progress and make sure it's ongoing?
See, specifically for our external reporting, if the ones who have read our reports, we use GRI as a global reporting framework. The main reason being GRI caters to all the types of stakeholders.
Yeah.
But from a business perspective, like from our internal evaluation point of view, we give much more priority for SASB and IFRS. Now, the reason for us do that is, as I told, the biggest driver for our ESG is investors and banks. And investors and banks are more and more looking at SASB and IFRS, which is based on SASB, right? So that's the reason why we look that for our internal valuation importance here. But this may not be the case for others, right? I think it depends on the type of stakeholders. For example, let's say if you're a company maybe not driven that much by the investors, maybe you still stick with GRI. I think World Economic Forum has come out with some good standards in the recent years, mainly in terms of value creation. I think that is something very recommended. But again, if you get into the world of frameworks and standards and sustainability, you will get confused. End of the day, keep it simple. What are your stakeholders' main needs? What do you think is reflecting you? Pick something, whether it is exactly right and wrong 100%, start with it.
No, I like that, because I sometimes find that consultants and people make it more complicated than it needs to be. And it can actually...
Yeah, but even we do that internally. So that we got that other teams are like, that is something standards, right?
Okay. So I asked a lot of questions. We typically always open up the floor for questions from the audience, because we do, kind of do that. So I have a question that we haven't answered, and for all those watching, please feel free to ask more questions. So I have a question saying, how do you see, or how is TAQA approaching the fast increasing demand of electricity by data centers, which is forecasted to consume 5% of the total electricity worldwide? Is this specifically factored in TAQA's strategy and sustainability strategy?
That's a very good question. I think If you come to the other side of the office, I can show you some data centers around, which I see directly facing my office, right? Yeah, I think that 5% is a good number. Usually that number which the person mentioned varies from 2.5 to 5%, but you won't be surprised it going even higher. I don't want to name the company, but I recently saw a sustained report of one of the global companies who explicitly stated one of the challenges in meeting their 2030 targets is actually amount of work they're doing on data centers and AIs and so on. See, it's a challenge. One is we have to recognize that as a key sector. I think we have to identify first what are the demand side management point of view measures which you can do. I think it's important when such centers are powered, it has to have, if it is not connected by a grid which is powered by renewables, it is being powered by, let's say, demand side management solution such as a renewable that's on site and for our thing. But to his or her question, how TAQA sees, I mean, we see it as a positive because we see it as a opportunity to have more demand. But from a climate change perspective, a responsibility for us is to drive it from nuclear and renewables. Yeah. See, as I told Abu Dhabi, I think what Department of Energy and EVAC, their plans, they're not only increasing the share of clean energy in the grid, there's a lot of ample reserve capacity in the system. That's something which is synonymous with most of the utilities here in the region. So there's always space to account that. But if you go to some parts of the globe, for them it might be a challenge because normally they only have, let's say, a reserve of around 5%. But I would say this region is well positioned as long as we make sure more and more, from TAQA's perspective, large-scale renewable energy projects are coming up. Because we see it as an opportunity because we have a huge demand. So why don't we have more solars into the grid? But again, demand side managers are equally important. You never know. There could be a scenario where them having their own solar might be a better option as well.
Right. There's another question we have from Mohsin. You mentioned that ADES is an energy efficiency arm of TAQA. How much of an impact will ADES have on decarbonization journey of TAQA, and has the impact been quantified?
So the impact, answer to your question, Mohsin, the impact has been quantified. So we launched our sustainable report last week. So you can see some quantitative numbers. So we clearly tell what are the savings from electricity, what are the savings from water. One more important thing to keep in mind, if not for us, our distribution companies at ADC supply the recycled water, which is actually coming from SWS Holding. So not sure if we have given a separate breakdown by ADES and the companies, but such numbers you can see in the report. But see, for me, demand side management globally, not just for TAQA, is a really important topic because I think before we go and talk about renewable energy and creating a lot of capacity in the system, we first have to see how much we can be efficient within the system.
Yeah.
Because more you efficient you become, because that's more of a lower cost option in terms of emission reduction. Less you have to invest in having capacities coming into the mix. ADES is fairly new, but I think what they have achieved in the last few years has been phenomenal. So they act as a super escort, which means if you are a company or in building where you want some energy efficiency measures, you go to them, they invest in their different energy efficiency measures, and there is an arrangement where the savings you get from the bill is shared with ADES or third passed on to ADES. I think ADES growth has picked up. They have, I think that is something also which you can see in the report also. There's a lot of projects in action. There are more and more MOUs being signed. And energy intensity, which is whether it is per capita use of electricity and water in this part of the world is like, so 2 to 5 times the world average. A lot of potential from that angle. So we believe ADES has a lot of potential getting into more sectors as well.
Yeah, because efficiency, in water and electricity can directly have financial impact.
Yeah.
The business case is very, very strong.
Yeah. Department of Energy has a demand side management and rationalization strategy. Maybe the impact may not be as pronounced as the renewables and nuclear they're putting in, but it's still a serious part, and you can expect some announcements coming from DOE in the near future as well, even accelerating all those initiatives.
We have another question from Ria, where she asks, how can consumers and individuals hold companies accountable to work on ESG?
A very good question.
And a very complicated one.
I'm thinking which country is it that did have some legislation passed. Well, I mean, you already see some examples when some big entities globally are being taken to the legal actions because of that. I mean, some take it for the right reasons and some take it for the wrong reasons. So that also happens.
Good.
See, I mean, let's say TAQA as an example, right? I think, how TAQA is affecting whether it is B2B or B2C customers. So when you are doing a greenhouse gas inventory, one of your main emissions is your scope 2 emissions, which is electricity, which you are actually taking from the grid. So I would assume if TAQA is not reducing your emission intensity or the grid emission factor, then let's say you need to have a preferential bill or preferential rates or something like that. I mean, that's one option which I see. I think the best solution for that is, tying some of the consumer's interest to some of the billing cycles or some sort of a payment scheme. That comes through the regulation, all well. But it's a good idea.
Will companies ever agree to that?
Again, I mean, it's a mindset, right? If they see it as a positive, if they thought sustainability as a value creation, and they don't see it as a problem. But if they don't see it as a value creation, then of course there will be negatives. But some things which might come more and more in the future based on what we have mentioned.
So basically, companies giving financial incentives to either your consumers and individuals to be held accountable for commitments.
Yeah. But there's an angle other way around as well, right? I've seen, because our sector may not be the best example for that.
Yeah.
There are a lot of products which you see in the supermarkets where you see now a lot of low carbon branding, green branding and everything. It comes with a lower emissions. But then even as a consumer, there's also right for the consumer to make sure they also make some informed choices. Right. But often you see even most of the consumers, they make decisions based on the cost, right? So there's a dual responsibilities on both the fronts.
Yeah.
But I think end of the day, consumer is the king. I think the responsibility of the governments and the corporates to make sure consumers get not only at lower emissions, but ideally at lower costs. But at some point of time, both the parties have to make some compromises.
Yeah. But I think from the cost angle, it's a balanced approach. I think sometimes the sustainable products are high priced because they're not made in economies of scale. They're made in small batches. They're using better quality material.
Exactly.
So the conversation is, I agree, needs a lot more education, especially with the amount of greenwashing that's prevalent.
I think the consumer industry especially, I think the initial days are not that very easy because the whole value chain is used to one way of doing the business, which is purely centered around less cost, right?
Yeah.
And not necessarily the regulation of whatever is actually fine-tuned for that. Yeah, so initially, there will be a stage where all parties have to actually bear the cost of it. Best is, let's say, the government or someone takes a cost of it.
Yeah.
But that calls the importance of all parties coming and then doing a decision. Because if all parties are coming and designing the value chain, you never know, overall cost might be low.
Yeah.
But until that happens, there might be some added costs.
Yeah.
Consumer industry especially. It's easy to connect as well because that's something that you see in the daily life.
Yeah. No, definitely. Are there any more questions that you'd like answered? Okay. So I think in the interest of time, because we're also hitting the last 5 minutes of the session, it really went by really smoothly and quickly, Fazil. It was really fun for me. If you'd like to give any advice or any last words of wisdom for everyone watching?
Oh, no words of wisdom. I can share some common things which is understood to all. See, I think sustainability, one thing which you have to make sure, climate change as a topic as well. As I told before, everyone thought, it's something being done by some countries over there, governments over there. But I think more and more realization, which all of us should have, what we already have, is that it's my problem, it's your problem, it's everyone's problem, right? End of the day, sustainability is all about how well you're utilizing your resources. So the demand you create from the ways of your, let's say, consumption is very important. So I think first and foremost, you all have to be a responsible consumer. Make sure you're not overusing something. Why do you use something? Keep in mind there's a big section in the world where they don't have the privilege to use anything at all. There are a lot of people getting affected by wars and everything. So you have to be a responsible consumer first. And even when you consume something, even if you put some extra cost, it's always advisable to purchase something on a sustainable manner. You do business in a sustainable manner. I think that is important. I think second, after being a responsible consumer, is awareness. You try to learn more. Whatever you know, you try to share the knowledge with your colleagues or your children, the next generation. I think that is very valuable. The more and more responsible the future generations or even the current generation is becoming, it has a big impact, because they are going to be the decision makers, the influencers. The time when you talked about to be 30, right? So when they are in that positions and make that strong decisions, I think the role of awareness and education can never be underplayed. So I think, those are the two things which I try to follow from my, let's say, individual point of view.
Perfect, man. That's really well put. Thank you so much, Fazil, for taking the time, for sharing all your information with everyone attending, and everyone who will watch the video. We really appreciate you joining us.
Thanks a lot, Namrata, and to the whole Shift Tech team. And looking forward to such conversations, me being on the other side in the future. It's a lot of, even from the previous sessions as a board, it's always good to hear from different perspectives and different people and see how they're approaching sustainability when there's no one-way solution.
Absolutely. And I think you did my closing. That's exactly what it is, Fazil. That's exactly what I always say. I think it's really interesting to hear different perspectives from different individuals, different industries, because there is no one solution. I just repeated what you exactly said. But stay tuned. We conduct these sessions once a month. We will have another one coming up in July. So please follow Shifty Go on LinkedIn and keep yourselves updated to our next events. Thank you so much for joining us, and we look forward to seeing you in our next session.